Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiriye Nashtaprayeshu Avadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhakti Bhakti Naishike. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Sasrup Das Goswami, Volume 2, Planting the Seed, New York City, 1965-66, Chapter 16th, Free to Preach. So Prabhupada met this boy, Robert Nelson, and he would come with Prabhupada, try to help him whichever way he could. So Prabhupada wanted to buy a big building. And without any money, he didn't have any money, and Robert didn't have money either. So Robert was saying the building was between 6th and Broadway on 42nd Street, some place to open Krishna's temple. We went in and up to the second floor and saw the renting agent, and then we left. I think it was 5,000 a month or 10,000 a month. We got to a certain point and the money was too much, and then we left. When we brought up the prices, I figured we had better not. We had to stop. On another occasion, Robert Nelson took Prabhupada by bus to the Hotel Columbia at 70 West 46th Street. The hotel had a suite that Prabhupada looked at for possible use as a temple. But again, it was very expensive, and then there was no money. Sometimes Robert would make purchases for Prabhupada with the money from his unemployment check. Once he bought orange-colored T-shirts. Once he went to Woolworths and bought kitchen pots and pans and some picture frames for Prabhupada's pictures of Lord Chaitanya and his spiritual master. So unemployment checks. So somehow US government gives to people who were employed and then they were laid off. So gives them for a few months. It just varies from person to person or state to state, and it can vary. So they can live by at least. Robert, one time I wanted to know how to make chapati cakes. So Swami says, $100, please, for the recipe. $100, please. So I went and got some money, but I couldn't get $100. But he showed me anyway. He taught me to cook and would always repeat, wash hands, wash hands. And you should only eat with your right hand. And whoever met the Swami was almost always impressed. They would start smiling back to him, and sometimes they would say funny things to each other that were nice. The Swami's English was very technical, always. I mean, he had a big vocabulary, but sometimes people had a little trouble understanding him, and you had to help him sometimes. The Paradox at 64 East 7th Street on the Lower East Side was a restaurant dedicated to the philosophy of Georges Osawa and the macrobiotic diet. Okay, so these are different streets. In New York, there are ways of numbering the streets. I think east-west, it goes as street, 7th Street, 8th Street, 9th Street, and north-south it goes avenue. 1st Avenue, 2nd Avenue, 3rd Avenue. And when it says 64 East 7th Street, so it's a 64 number, not the avenue, not the street. Street is 7th Street. So whether it's east of something, so they have their own way. But it's very technical. It's not doesn't go by the names of the streets. It's 1st Street, 2nd Street, and so this is how this is a naming convention they chose. So it was so Paradox is the restaurant. It was a storefront below street level with some dining tables placed around the candlelit room. So below the street level, so it was in the basement. The food was inexpensive and well reputed. Tea was served free as much as you liked. More than just a restaurant, the Paradox was a center for spiritual and cultural interests. A meeting place reminiscent of the cafes of Greenwich Village or Paris in the 1920s. A person could spend the whole day at the Paradox without buying anything, and no one would complain. The crowd at the Paradox was a mystical congregation interested in teachings from the East. When news of the new Swami uptown at Dr. Mishra's reached the Paradox, the word spread quickly. Harvey Cohen and Bill Epstein were friends. Harvey was a freelance artist and Bill worked at the Paradox. After Harvey had been to Prabhupada's place at Dr. Mishra's yoga studio a few times, he came by the Paradox and began to describe all about the new Swami to Bill and other friends. Bill: I was working at the Paradox one night when Harvey came to me and said, I went to visit Mishra and there is a new Swami there and he's really fantastic. Well, I was involved in macrobiotics and Buddhism, and so at first I couldn't care less. But Harvey was a winning and warm personality and he seemed interested in this. He said, why don't you come uptown? I would like you to see this. So I went to one of the lectures on 72nd Street. I walked in there and I could feel a certain presence from the Swami. He had a certain very concentrated, intense appearance. He looked pale and kind of weak. I guess he had just come here and he had been through a lot of things. He was sitting there chanting on his beads, which he carried in a little bead bag. One of Dr. Mishra's students was talking and he finally got around to introducing the Swami. He said, we are the moons to the Swami's sun. He introduced him in that way. The Swami got up and talked. I didn't know what to think about it. At that time, the only steps I had taken in regard to Indian teaching were through Ramakrishna. But this was the first time, to my knowledge, that Bhakti religion had come to America. Bill Epstein, quite in contrast to Robert Nelson, was a dashing, romantic person with long, wavy, dark hair and a beard. He was good-looking and effervescent and took upon himself the role of informing people at the restaurant of the city's spiritual news. Once he became interested in the new Swami, he made the Swami an ongoing topic of conversation at the restaurant. Bill: I went in the back and I asked Richard, the manager, I'm going to take some food to the Swami. You don't mind, do you? He said, no, take anything you want. So I took some brown rice and other stuff and I brought it up there. I went upstairs and I knocked on the door and there was no answer. I knocked again and I saw that the light was on because it had a glass panel. And finally, he answered. I was really scared because I had never really accepted any teacher. He said, come in, sit down. We started talking and he said to me, the first thing that people do when they meet is to show each other love. They exchange names, they exchange something to eat. So he gave me a slice of apple and he showed me the tape recorder he had, probably for recording his chants. Then he said, have you ever chanted? I said, no, I haven't chanted before. So he played a chant and then he spoke to me some more. He said, you must come back. I said, well, if I come back, I'll bring you some more food. James Green, a 30-year-old carpentry teacher at Cooper Union, was delving into Eastern philosophy. He lived on the same block as the Paradox and began hearing about the Swami from Harvey Cohen and Bill Epstein while regularly taking his evening meal at the restaurant. So this is also one of the traditions here. Hardly anybody cooks. They just eat at the restaurant. So this was in 1965. Now so many restaurants all over America have opened up. And people just like to eat over there. This is such a norm here. James, it was really Harvey and Bill who got things going. I remember one evening at Mishra's in which Swamiji was only a presence but did not speak. Mishra's students seemed more into the bodily aspect of yoga. This seemed to be one of Swamiji's complaints. His room on 72nd Street was quite small. He was living in a fairly narrow room with the door on the one end. Swamiji would set himself up along one side, and we were rather closely packed. It may have been no more than 8 feet wide, and it was rather dim. He sat on his thin mattress, and then we sat on the floor. We wouldn't chant. We would just come, and he would lecture. There was no direction other than the lecture on the Bhagavad Gita. I had read a lot of literature, and in my own shy way, I was looking for a master. I think I have no aggression in me or go-getting quality. I was really just a listener. And this seemed right, hearing the Bhagavad Gita, so I kept coming. It just seemed as if things would grow from there. More and more people began coming. Then it got crowded, and we had to find another place. So the new group from the Paradox was young and hip in contrast to the older, more conservative uptown people who had been attending Prabhupada's classes. In those days, it was still unusual to see a person with long hair and a beard. And when such people started coming to the Swami's meetings on the west side, some of the older people were alarmed. As one of them noted, Swami Bhaktivedanta began to pick up another kind of people. He picked them up at the Bowery or some attics, and they came with funny hats and grey blankets wrapped around themselves, and they startled me. Now, when he says he picked them up at the Bowery or some other attics. Now, Bowery is like a very different area because it has lots of drug addicts, hippies, like not a place that anybody, any gentleman would like to even go to. And proper students, some of them were coming from Bowery. Like once somebody told me, although I've never been there, like in Delhi, if I'm right, Sultanpuri area. Now you can understand what kind of people were there. David Allen, a 21-year-old seeker who came up from the Paradox, had just moved to the city, optimistically attracted by what he had read about experimentation with drugs. He saw the old group as a kind of first budgety group of older women on the west side listening to Swami's lectures. David, we weren't known as hippies then, but it was strange for the people who had originally been attracted to him. It was different for them to relate to this new group. I think most of the teachers from India up to that time had older followers, and sometimes wealthy widows would provide a source of income. But Swamiji changed right away to the younger, poorer group of people. The next thing that happened was that Bill Epstein and others began talking about how it would be better for the Swami to come downtown to the lower east side. So there is downtown and then there is uptown. So uptown was little more rich people would live there. And downtown would be mostly hippies and drug addicts, those kind of. Things were really happening down there, and somehow they weren't happening uptown. People downtown really needed him. Downtown was right, and it was ripe. There was life down there. There was a lot of energy going around. A lot of energy because the youngsters would generally hang out in the downtown side. So thus ends chapter 16. We will start chapter 17 on the Bowery. I couldn't understand the difference between friends and enemies. My friend was shocked to hear that I was moving to the Bowery. But although I passed through many dangers, I never thought that this is danger. Everywhere I thought this is my home. Srila Prabhupada in conversation. So Bowery, as we know, drug addicts and those kind of people, poor people, that was a area. And so April 1966, someone broke into room 307 while Srila Prabhupada was out and stole his typewriter and tape recorder. When Prabhupada returned to the building, the janitor informed him of the theft. An unknown burglar had broken the transom glass, climbed through, taken the valuables, and escaped. As Prabhupada listened, he became convinced that the janitor himself was the culprit. Of course, he couldn't prove it, so he accepted the loss with disappointment. Some friends offered replacements for his old typewriter and tape recorder. In a letter to India, he described the theft as a loss of more than 1,000 rupees, $157. It is understood that such crime as has been committed in my room is very common in New York. This is the way of material nature. American people have everything in ample, and the worker gets about rupees 100 as daily wages. And still there are thieves for want of character. The social condition is not very good. And of course, in that area, depends which area of the city one lives in. Prabhupada had told Joseph Forster, the Scindia ticket agent, that he would be returning to India in a couple of months. That was 7 months ago. Now, for the first time since his arrival, Prabhupada had returned to the Scindia ticket office in Brooklyn. He talked about the theft to Mr. Forster, who responded with, "Welcome to the club." Hence, these things happen. And told Prabhupada about the recent theft of his own automobile. Such things, he explained, were not unusual for New York City. He told Prabhupada of the dangers of the city and how to avoid thefts and muggings. Prabhupada listened, shaking his head. He told Mr. Forster that American young people were misguided and confused. He discussed his plans for returning to India and showed Mr. Forster one of his Bhagavatam. Prabhupada had lost his spirit for living in room 307. What would prevent the janitor from stealing again? Harvey Cohen and Bill Epstein had advised him to relocate downtown and had assured him of a more interested following among the young people there. It had been an attractive proposal, and he began to consider it. Then Harvey offered Prabhupada his studio on the Bowery. Harvey had been working as a commercial artist for a Madison Avenue advertising firm when a recently acquired inheritance had spurred him to move into a loft on the Bowery to pursue his own career as a painter. But he was becoming disillusioned with New York. A group of acquaintances addicted to heroin had been coming around and taking advantage of his generosity, and his loft had recently been burglarized. Means, okay, somebody stole from his loft also. He decided to leave the city and go to California, but before leaving, he offered his loft of Prabhupada to share with David Allen. David Allen had heard that Harvey Cohen was moving to San Francisco if he could sublet his loft. Harvey hadn't known David very long, but on the night before Harvey was supposed to leave, he coincidentally met David 3 different times in 3 different places on the Lower East Side. Harvey took this as a sign that he should rent the loft to David, but he specifically stipulated that the Swami should move in too. So Prabhupada was going to share this loft. Loft is a very small area to live in. And he's going to share it with David. And David was not his student. As Prabhupada was preparing to leave his 72nd Street address, an acquaintance, an electrician who worked in the building, came to warn him. The Bowery was no place for a gentleman, he protested. It was the most corrupt place in the world, he said. Prabhupada's things had been stolen from room 307, but moving to the Bowery was not the answer. That's how bad it was. And Prabhupada moved there, lived there. Srila Prabhupada's new home, the Bowery, had a long history. In the early 1600s, when Manhattan was known as New Amsterdam and was controlled by the Dutch West India Company, Peter Minuit, the governor of New Netherlands, staked out a north-south road that was called the Bowery, because a number of Boweries or farms lay on other side. It was a dusty country road lined with quaint Dutch cottages and bordered by the peach orchards growing in the estate of Peter Stuyvesant. It became part of the high road to Boston and was of strategic importance during the American Revolution as the only land entrance to New York City. In the early 1800s, the Bowery was predominated by German immigrants. Later in the century, it became predominantly Jewish, and gradually it became the city's center of theatrical life. However, as a history of Lower Manhattan describes, after 1870 came the period of the Bowery's celebrated degeneration. Fake auction rooms, saloons specializing in fights and whiskey, and knockout drops, sensational dime museums, filthy and rat-ridden stale beer dives, together with Charles M. White's song, the Bowery, I'll never go there anymore, fixed it forever in the nation's consciousness as a place of unspeakable corruption. So even in America, those places were there, they're still there. But somehow America is still land of opportunity for materialism. So people still come. Anyway, I guess we can stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments. And everybody has a nice Kartik month. Must have done the Deepdan today. So enjoy the whole full month of Kartik.
Yes, Prabhuji. Started this Deepdan yesterday only. So with Damodar.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji, and same to you.
Thank you, Vida. Same to you.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Chalo, you all have safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila.
Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Krishna.